Thanks for being here. You're on Well Traveled Life with Jonathan and Jennifer, and today we are in Christchurch on the South Island of New Zealand. Christchurch is the largest city on the South Island of New Zealand and has a fairly significant earthquake history that has changed the course of many cities in New Zealand. If you're coming to the city by cruise ship, you actually won't be able to dock in Christchurch. They will dock either in Lyttleton or Akaroa. We have been to both. And then you'll need to drive into Christchurch. The reason being, Christchurch is inside the crater of a volcano. So you'll need to get up over the mountain to get into the city. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about Akaroa, we'll talk a little bit about Lyttleton, we'll talk about Christchurch, and we're actually going to go out to Springfield, where we had a spectacular adventure on jet boats, and then took a 4x4 vehicle up into the Highland Farms in the mountains to see the views from above. So let's start by introducing you to Jules, who is our guide for the day. He is also a botanist, a historian, a geologist, and a certified arborist.
So I'm Jules. What do I like to do? I like to share my country, share my island with people, so that they can share it with other people and that they can come over and I can tell them about it.
Only Auckland is larger than Christchurch, but no city is older than Christchurch. In 1856, it received its royal charter and became the first city in New Zealand. It may have been named in honor of Christchurch in Oxford, England, which would be fitting because early settlers had dreams of modeling the city after Oxford with its cathedral and surrounding college. Unfortunately, the spire of the cathedral is one of the things that was lost in the earthquake. And while the city has just recently come up with a rebuilding plan, it is still not an intact church. To get from Lyttleton into the city of Christchurch, you will go through a tunnel that has been bored through the rim of that volcano. Being in the middle of a tunnel in a volcano in a place that's prone to earthquakes might be a little frightening, but I can assure you it has withstood over 18,000 earthquakes, including the big ones, and it has maintained its structure. It is egg-shaped, and so it's the physics of it that is keeping it intact. The port of Lyttleton was terribly damaged in the disastrous earthquake of 2011. The rubble that was removed from both Lyttleton and Christchurch has been used to actually expand and rebuild the port area of Lyttleton. After the port was destroyed in 2011 with the earthquake, it was shut down, and it was about a decade before it got rebuilt and reopened. So we were there in 2016 and ended up in Akaroa. We loved Akaroa as a small village, a tiny, beautiful bay. And because it was about an hour and a half to get from Akaroa into Christchurch, and because at that time Christchurch still really hadn't been rebuilt, we ended up spending our time in Akaroa. We loved the village. Most importantly, we went swimming with Hector's dolphin. These are the smallest and most rare dolphins in the world and are endemic to New Zealand. They are also exceptionally social and playful. We had pre-booked our experience with a dive shop that is right on the pier. They will outfit you in wetsuits, take you out into the middle of the ocean, spot the dolphins, and then let you jump out and swim with them. The dolphins are tremendously social. They swam through our legs. They were absolutely eager to meet us. So we thought Akaroa, with its cottage gardens and its community markets, was really a special stop, and we would make that a destination again. But I'm not sure it's the best way to access Christchurch. Lyttleton is so much better for that.
But yeah, to lose the port would have been basically to lose Christchurch.
As you travel through Lyttleton and even into Christchurch, you will still continue to see the remains of buildings. You'll see piles of rubble and cleared lots that just haven't been rebuilt on.
A lot of the artwork that you're seeing, the graffiti artwork, was actually commissioned by the city to make it look nice whilst all the buildings were being torn down and you could see the back end of buildings rather than the front side. They had to make a decision of how to rebuild, didn't they? Right, so it's not something you wake up to in the morning and think, right, how do you rebuild a city? So there was obviously a lot of discussion with the public. Many ideas were mooted, put forward, a little bit of consultation here and there, and it just nothing really happened for, I'd say, about 7 or 8 years. But the idea for Christchurch coming into the future is zero cars, no cars. They've dropped the speed down to 30 k's an hour. They want to make it a bicycle and scooter sort of friendly city.
In this new plan, though, one of the building stipulations is that no building could be higher than 6 stories, and most were not to be higher than 3 stories. Again, trying to avoid the devastation that happened the first time should there be another extreme earthquake like before. Christchurch is known as a garden city with well-developed riverfront property, botanic gardens, and lots of parks and green space within the city. It's sort of funny how those green spaces came to be, though. There were some families that, when they were pioneering here, felt differently about some of the religious and English influences that were taking place, and they wanted a buffer zone between them and their more pious neighbors, and so they donated land to be a park to keep the distance. Christchurch has the unique ability to continue to grow. It is really not bounded by anything besides the plains, which is exciting because as it's being rebuilt, there is just an abundance of space. And as the city has rebuilt after the earthquake, people have been afraid to go back into a city center CBD environment. You're seeing more small towns with small planned communities. At New Zealand's beginning, farming was the predominant industry in the entire South Island. So most people, including Jules, our guide, would say that he was a farmer even as a young man, and it's really his generation that is the first to maybe not have farming as their primary economic driver. Tourism has picked up, but it's really only in about the last 20 years that tourism has gone outside of New Zealanders visiting their own country. International travel to, in, and around New Zealand is relatively new then. Although Christchurch was built on the inside of this crater of a volcano, the volcanoes aren't really the story of New Zealand. Although there are extinct volcanoes on the island, that isn't how New Zealand was formed. It was not from lava spills or overflows. It was actually from a combination of the shifting of tectonic plates and erosion. We're going to let Jules explain this.
There was an island off the coast of what you're now standing on. So we've got the fault line that runs in behind us here. It runs right down the spine of the country, basically, of the island.
As the Australian and Pacific plates abducted, they pushed the ground upwards, and that is the formation of those mountains that you see in Fiordland on the western side of the country. So that explains the mountains, but where did the rest of the flatland come from?
That as these mountains came up in the tectonic abduction, so this is when the river comes important. So this river here is the Waimakariri, there's the Rakaia, the Rangitata, there's the Clarence, the Wairau, the Waiau, and they're all of these massive braided rivers. If they didn't erode, they'd be higher than the Himalayas.
So as these massive rivers wear down the mountains around them, that eroded land is forming the rest of the island.
That's what this island is. It's stuff from up here, brought out by the rivers, smashed into those volcanoes over there, backed up, and built up. These ranges through here are about 2,000 metres, and just down to the south of us are the highest mountains, Mount Cook, Mount Diakiak, and etc. They're about 3,400 metres, which is kind of amazing considering we were under the sea at some point.
You can't look at New Zealand's geography and not also consider its history. The Maori had a significant pause or fortified hilltop settlements throughout New Zealand, and especially in this area. Jules will tell us a little bit about their practices.
Back in the day, pre-European Māori history, they would have been fortified Māori pā. They were hunting, moa. There were haast eagles, there were huge birds. They'd come up in their hunting parties, up into the mountains, where all the flightless parrots were. There was a flighted bird.
Christchurch was the economic hub even for the Maori, but overhunting of the moa and tribal warfare eliminated many of the original Maori tribes. But it's clear that the Maori influence is still felt from the beginning of the English colonization of the islands.
None of us would have known anything if it hadn't been for the Maori people coming through here, finding their greenstone, the Pounamu. The South Island's Maori name is Te Wai Panomu, land of the greenstone.
Not only that, but the roads and railroad routes are all based on the Maori tracks that they had found through the Alps and from one side of the island to the other. Another obvious element of the landscapes around us were these huge hedges. And Jules gave us an explanation of why they're there and what problems there might actually be connected to them.
The wind that used to whistle down through here, all the soil blows that way straight out to the ocean and it doesn't do a lot of good out there. So the hedges were built to trap the soil. It was also there to give the animals cover in the winter. We're on a bit of a cusp at the moment as to what we're doing with the environment.
Because of the incredibly nutrient-rich water that runs in the rivers, as well as the nutrient-rich soil coming down from the mountains, this is a gardening mecca. But New Zealand relies on milk production as one of its prime industries, and one of the largest milk-producing plants is located right here next to the Waimakariri River. As dairy and crop farming became more popular, there was a need for more water on the land, and so instead of having just irrigation lines, farmers have found that they could water more space using the large irrigating arms that you see sort of hovering over the fields. Well, in order to do those, they had to take out a bunch of those hedgerows that were stopping the winds, and it has meant that there's increased water leaving the river and much more erosion of the good soils.
So what we're doing with our water and what we're doing with our soil, it just starts to get a wee bit, when you're thinking, come on man, doesn't just happen to occur here, It took a long time to get like this, but it takes a short amount of time to whip it up.
Jules took us by 4x4 up to the top of the foothill ridges where we got to really get an up-close look at high farming. This is where Jules' obvious love for the environment, as well as his specific knowledge about the plants and their history and their uses, really became fascinating for us.
So if you were to take a cabbage tree apart from the outside, peel it all off like this, peel down the trunk, you'd be left with a very hard centre. The Māori would roast them, put it on the fire, roast them up, and that was their energy bar. That was the original muesli bar. The cabbage tree also, if you hollowed it out and kept the outside of it, was also one of the first chimneys that they used to use in the sod houses and the cob huts that used to be made, because they are fire resistant as well. So quite a handy wee plant, the cabbage tree. It looks funny.
The cabbage tree is more than just nutritionally useful or good as a chimney, it also is a weather predictor.
And in fact, cabbage trees don't flower every year. They only flower when there's going to be plenty of water in the season.
Heading up into the mountains, we were able to see how the high country farms are making their way. They have 3 streams of income, including the farming operation.
Tawley Station. Yep, private owner, has been in the family for I think 4 generations. It's about 30,000 acres. 95% of that is high country, hard farming. A percentage of that is flatlands where you can graze. When the owners of it would bring their cattle and sheep from the inside up there, the high country, for the winter periods, and they run a Perrindale Rumney cross sheep, and they crossbreed it so that they can get hardy sheep with fine wool, plenty of meat.
This tourist industry that we're a part of today, and conservation.
And so the government might end up paying the farmer for that land, yes. Not renting it, but they'll pay it, they'll buy it off them. And then they'll retire it. The gorse was brought over by our colonists over in England, where it sits the hedgerows and it stops the animals from wandering. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but in our environment, it flowers twice a year. The seeds can stay active in the soil for decades and decades. So gorse is one of our biggest pests.
Where the land had been purchased from farmers and allowed to become natural again, we could see where the gorse was dying out.
And you'll see the gorse and the broom, it only ever gets to a certain height, under 2 metres, Then the natives start growing back over the top of it, starving it of sunlight, and eventually the native outgrows the exotic.
Jules was invaluable in helping us understand the delicate balance of ecosystems. The native New Zealand beech tree has a sap that the scale insects feed upon, and they secrete honeydew. And then this sooty mold grows on the honeydew and can be detrimental to the trees.
The insect, if you can imagine it, is a mouth and a bottom. The mite burrows down into it, has an anal tube, and so the amount of sugars that it eats has too much sugar, and it secretes it out the back of its tube. So that's for insects and birds and everything else. So that's for a whole new ecosystem, but also for honeydew.
New Zealand is famous for its manuka honey, which has multiple medicinal properties. But there's another native tree, the kanuka, which is equally effective.
And so the white flowered tree, that's the kanuka. There's some of those, the tea tree, Australians know that. And that is a cousin to the manuka plant. And the manuka is the honey that people get. Kanuka now has got qualities that would equal that of manuka. The manuka's got the red flower, kanuka's got the white flower.
As we contemplated the beauty of this area and talked about how much we would like to camp and overland around here, Jules had warnings for us regarding the weather and the rapidly changing environment.
A lot of Kiwis do try to do it, and a lot of Kiwis get caught out between the rivers and going for a walk up here, thinking, oh, it's a beautiful day, nice day for a walk. 20 minutes later, get a bit cold, so that can flash flood. At the moment, you think the wind's going that way, but the high wind's going this way, and you get caught out. And so we get a lot of people, unfortunately, die in this island just getting caught out.
The matagari plant is another one of those really frightening but useful plants.
So this plant here is matagari. I'm about 2 meters tall. Over 2 meters, this is protected, right? Under 2 meters, you can do what you like.
This is the thorniest plant in the world and has needles that will actually, when dried, go through steel radial tires. But as Jules tells us, that can be useful for humans and other animals.
Covered little red berries, and so there's a whole ecosystem built around this plant here. The birds, the keridu, the wood pig come in and they feed off it. For species that are preyed upon, they can hide in here. So even sheep with the kia, the lambs come in here because the kia, which is a flightless parrot, it'll take a lamb out. For Māori as well, and they use them as needles for needling, any of that work. And also you'll see on the Māori there's a lot of tattooing. The sharp could also be used as a tattooing tool as well.
And interestingly, this plant is only found on the South Island. From above or below, the color of the waimakariri were absolutely spectacular.
The color of that water, it's not actually the color blue of the water, it is the nutrient layer that sits on top of it, right? So it gives it that beautiful blue hue.
After seeing the devastation from the 2011 earthquake and understanding the history of earthquakes in this area, you can't help but wonder if the little shake in the ground that you're feeling is in fact an earthquake. And the truth is, it probably is an earthquake.
You want to be having earthquakes a lot, taking out all the pressure, because this is our main active fault line, like the American, San Andreas, that one.
As we traveled inland towards Springfield, we made it about 2/3 of the way across the island to the foothills. Springfield actually does have a spring, and it is sort of the end of the railroad. From here, people would have to walk, trek, or use horses and mules to get across the mountains to the other side of the island.
Actually, Springfield used to be called Kauai. Kauai in Māori is a place between two rivers. So between the Kauai River and Waimakariri River. And Kauai was also very important for the Māori because it was their last camp spot basically where they would go before hunting up into the ranges.
Soldiers coming back from the war were given small plots of land as thanks for their service to the country. Unfortunately, those weren't substantial enough to make a profit, but they would allow them to live subsistently. They ended up oftentimes selling, and so this is where the beginning of the big sheep stations started. Buyers that were buying up large parcels of land, and especially in the highlands where farming is really much more difficult, that was the only way for people to turn a profit from the land.
The Merinos, Perindale did really well, Romney, and so we started getting known for our sheep and our quality of wool. And these big stations here, 40,000 acres, started to grow because those sheep are almost like goats. A lot of the high country's been retired, and you'll see the native bush coming back. With the native bush, we're starting to get the return of the birds, but we've still got a major pest problem.
The animals that were originally brought over for sport hunting and even food have become pests. Things like rabbits and weasels, deer, pigs, goats, and they are continuing to be a problem for the native environment. Thanks for staying with us this far. Now you're getting to the good point. We are going to go jet boating on the Waimakariri River.
Waimakariri River in Māori means cold waters.
We booked with Alpine Jet Thrills, which is an awesome jet boat adventure outfit. They have a great building here with a restaurant that served us lunch, as well as a potty stop and a great little gift shop with a lot of local and handmade items for sale. They even have a jet boat museum of sorts, and we'll take you through and give you a little bit of the history and the mechanics of how jet boats work. Essentially, they are taking water in and shooting it back out, providing your forward propulsion. They can go incredibly fast in incredibly shallow amounts of water. So really it needs just 6 inches of water, and they're famous for doing these terrific spins. So watch and have fun. We did.
Right, I'm Callum, and we're at the Alpine Thrills. Alright, we took a little half an hour trip up the Waimak, and yeah, it was pretty exciting, I thought.
About how fast were we going?
On the way up we're doing 80, on the way down we're doing about 100 kilometers per hour. Yeah, it'd be more fun if it was miles per hour, wouldn't it? But it is a jet boat. It is also a twin engine jet boat. We have no rudder underneath, we have no propeller. It's all internal to the boat, so we can skip across really shallow water. It's actually my first day here.
I think it's so cool that we got you on your first day.
Yeah, we got away, almost got away with it. No, it's pretty standard, pretty normal.
Running aground, that's all okay?
That was only once. It was fun.
I just want to thank you. It was awesome.
You're welcome.
All right.
Glad you enjoyed it.
This was an amazing experience. We felt so up close and informed about the environment that we were in. We could not thank Jules enough, and Callum, our boat driver, was beyond awesome. We found out it was his first day on the job, and I don't know if you caught it in the footage, but he nearly grounded us, which actually was kind of fun too. But this day for us was just a perfect combination of adventure and information and getting up close and local.
That was awesome. Oh, cheers, thank you very much. Thank you.
We're so glad you came along for the ride. I hope you will join us at our next adventure in Wellington.